So I thought I'd do an update on one of my big nursery gardens. I just finished a pretty rugged weeding that should never have had to happen, but life finds a way of getting a little more complicated than we anticipate in the beginning of the season. So I've got a video on how I initially formed this nursery space and how the bed shapes work. Essentially, it's a process of digging out where the pathways are going to be, putting those on the production beds, and then filling up the trenches with wood chips and then covering everything else with wood chips as well. I'm going to be talking a little bit quiet. I hope you can hear me because my daughter is sleeping on me right now. So, and of course there'll be some other noises from the road. Let's just pause through that for a second. That's awesome. Of course, they're going to be mowing the grass for the next however long, even though there's no grass growing with this kind of drought that we've been having. Anyway, so what's going on here? So up at this end, I've got American hazelnuts that are growing for their second season in the ground. So good luck to me to dig these out in the coming months. That's going to be really super fun. These are going to have extensive root systems, and these things are going to be 4 feet tall by the end of the season. So that may have been a little bit too successful. Second year transplanted peaches. These were grown as tiny little, kind of too small to sell or even plant seedlings, and so I just popped them in. And of course, like the second you're transplanting, it's a ton more work, but you know, there's a lot of good peaches in here that have grown really well. And transplanted peaches and sort of any little tiny seedling that you don't know whether it's worth planting in a landscape, you can throw in a nursery bed like this. And I don't really have it figured out as to what makes them take off or not. Like, these peaches didn't do anything for most of the season, and then all of a sudden they put on growth from like down there. You know, this is the top of the original plant there, and it mostly died back, looked terrible for most of the season, and then finally they just get their roots set, they get their mycorrhizal friendships all associated, and then boom, then they start to grow like crazy. So, you know, you wait until July and then you finally start to see real growth. These, on the other hand, were transplanted varietal chestnuts that I accidentally, that huge pile of foxtail grass was overshadowing these until last night when I cut them back. They were too big to dig out. You can see a crater where I tried to dig one out or rip it out, and then I was like, with this kind of dry weather, we're going to do too much damage. So I ended up cutting them to the ground instead, and that's fine. Nice pathway mulch. So hopefully those will put on another final growth spurt, but it's getting the last couple weeks here to really put growth on before you don't want plants to grow that much more, perennials anyway, or else they'll get zapped by the frost because they don't have time to harden off. Here's a bed of second year in-ground chestnuts that would have been 6 feet tall had they not been hammered by deer, but that's okay. That means they're going to have super robust root systems, and next year if these get dug up and transplanted out somewhere else, they're just going to be ready to go and explode probably past deer browse in the first year of planting if they're protected. Again, not going to be the funnest to dig out. In this little bed here, there's probably 60 or 70 plants. In there's probably 200, and I'll have to dig all those out pretty carefully. Here's a nice juxtaposition of second year in-ground persimmons with second-year in-ground pawpaws right next to them. The persimmons are to the south, so they provided a little bit of shade to the pawpaws, and you can sort of see the pawpaws that are closer to the persimmons grew a little bit better, and as you trail away, over there, they're much smaller. I wish I could get a better picture of this in profile. It's kind of amazing, actually. Here's the persimmons to the south, and then the pawpaws declining to the north, meaning that when they're right just on the north side of that nice shade, that's a much better microclimate for them than over here where they're getting hotter in the full sun. So anywhere that I had failures of things that just didn't germinate, I just transplanted in Tulsi because it's such a wonderful grower. It can take some pretty brutal heat and still make really nice, just grow really well. And so that was sort of, I had a big tray of it, and maybe 3 weeks ago or something like that, wherever there were holes, I just filled them with that. That way at least we'll get a nice yield out of it and cover the soil. This was direct sown Carpathian and varietal black walnuts, and they just were at a point in the season where they got absolutely hammered by squirrels. Here's a pawpaw bed that came up pretty decently. There would have been a lot more if I had irrigated. I irrigated one time 4 days ago, and you can see still lots of little tiny seedlings coming up, but overall it's not an amazing germination, but it's also not done germinating yet. And the heat is just, this can happen just from heat. It's pretty sad. A lot of them will make it, but this was an extremely poor choice of mine. I should have put something in to give them some shade and some break from the heat. I didn't really think that one through super well, to be honest. In the future, just to safeguard from these kind of heat waves, I should really make sure to give them a much more protected, shady location. And I've done that in the past and had bad results because of really low sunlight. So I figured I'd give them full sun and just really top them up on nice myceliated mulch, which seems to have worked for the most part, but I think I suffered some losses. But suffice to say, that's just full sun, direct sown pawpaws, so they can do it. But I think some shade would probably help them out. It's always a tension between, you want them to get sun because then they'll grow faster and more sturdy and vigorous, and they'll have better root systems, but you also don't want them to die from too much heat and dry. This bed of direct sown chestnuts looking pretty good. Got hit by deer a couple times, so they got held back a little bit, but overall quite a bit of chestnuts for first year. And then I did a separate video about this garlic yesterday that I'm just going to add in here. So forgive me for a potentially awkward segue, but here we go. I'm doing some very, very needed weeding in one of my nursery gardens, and I just thought I'd share an update on the garlic. We've harvested garlic. It was the best garlic I've ever grown. We had a lot of 3-inch plus, 3-inch and a quarter, even a 3-inch and a half heads. So really the most phenomenal size I've ever seen, really. And as Brian and I harvested it, we left the mulch pretty much intact. We left the Carpathian walnuts growing. They had been planted last fall with the garlic. And then we carefully weeded around certain things that we left growing, including some apples and apricot seedlings that had just self-sown, tomatoes and kale, and some squash that had self-sown. And then came in and planted all this basil. And so this, with basically no weeds now, is where the garden was, where the garlic was rather. And we've got a sea of basil that we'll be able to actually do a market harvest for, and lots of other uses, some pumpkin, just really lots of good stuff that we're gonna get a huge amount of value out of. Some of the basil was hit and miss, but in the places where the basil didn't fare super well, the Carpathian walnuts have been faring super well. So all in all, probably a couple hundred Carpathian walnuts, which grew phenomenally, and a small but significant market harvest of basil, and lots of basil for our own needs. There's a cherry. It's kind of fun just to see the volunteer weeds that come up. Obviously there's still real weeds that we have to get out. We've got lots of foxtail barley in here. But in addition to that, there's like, in this bed, there's probably 5 apricot seedlings, 6 apples, a couple pears, cherries, and some persimmons, and then annuals like kale, squash, all that stuff are annual. All that stuff are just volunteer. So you just have to be a little more selective when you're weeding, and you keep all that value. Oh, husk cherries too. So that's just an update. And the day that we pulled the garlic, it was very hot. We've had a crazy heat wave with like weeks over 90. And so for the mulch to be this effective in this garden, I am just amazed. I mean, we watered this garden one time, and it wasn't even because of any heat stress or drought stress in this bed. It was because up here, these crates up here where I have a lot of Nanking cherries were getting about dead dry. So I needed to water, and I figured, well, I'll just sprinkle the whole place. But that's one watering in the entire season so far. So pretty incredible. Oh yeah, lots of Tulsi too. So anyway, keeping the garlic really weed-free and mulched is worth so much more than just not having a weedy plot, but you can also transition directly into these other crops. And my MO for garlic in the past had always been take out the garlic, maybe do a cover crop if you have time, or maybe just mow the weeds off, and that's about it. And I was looking to get a little more sophisticated with that, and got the idea of interplanting the nuts at the same time as the garlic from Sean, my good friend from Edible Acres. And now keeping really on top of the weeds and then planting right as the garlic comes out allows you to just sort of continuously get really good value out of the space that you've already worked so hard to prepare. Here I've just begun transplanting out some summer cuttings. These are really well-rooted elderberry cuttings, and I've got hundreds more of those coming in right now. So I'm gonna have to irrigate once again, and we've got the elephant garlic came out here, and I've got some bare spot over there, and that bed has some empty spaces. So I'm gonna get that nice and moist, pick a day that doesn't get to 100 degrees, and try to transplant a lot more cuttings that are getting hardened off. That's sort of a dicey move at this point in the season, but we've got lots of cuttings that are nicely rooted, and I want to get them some amount of growth. We've taken a lot of cuttings off of this bed, and this is Smoky Saskatoon. The cuttings root really well, and they can layer really well, stool layering, just by putting more material in. So that's generating a lot of plants. And this bed over here is just some really interesting plants that I absolutely am loving. So this one right here is done, I don't want to walk around. It's done blooming right now, but it's one of my most cherished aromas. It's called Meadow Sweet. This is the real, quote unquote, real Meadow Sweet, Filipendula, and not a spirea. So I have a lot of family in Norway, and whenever we used to go visit, we have like this little boat dock. We would go down and take a rowboat out, and that whole area was just surrounded by that, so that when the smell really brings me back there. And this is compass plant, a helianthus that points to the sun at different times of the day, sort of like, you know, like the quintessential sunflowers. And that's wild licorice here. And then over there we've got wild quinine, Columbines, and then the really big one is Sochan, which is just one of my favorite plants of all time. That's, I believe that's a transplant in its second year. So it was grown from seed 2 years ago, transplanted in there, and then this is what it does in the second year. So pretty incredible growth, edible all the way through the season, wonderful nectary. It's just amazing plant. Here we've got some Quinnelian cherry seedlings, and then a little spot where I started some evergreens that had super mixed success. It's pretty hard to grow evergreens. I guess I just don't have it figured out yet, but like these are Western red cedar, Thuya plicata, and then this is an Eastern red cedar, which is a Juniperus virginiana. I've got some white pines that I'm going to use as rootstock for Korean pine. These ones here I just dug up from the lawn where I had to mow, so I wanted to grow them out and plant them somewhere else. And this was all sugar pine, Pinus lambertiana, in the second year, and they are mostly all dead, and the ones that are alive have grown maybe less than 1/2 of an inch, so not super amazing on that one. And then just a couple fun, there's like some, oh yeah, this is Thuya occidentalis from seed, so Eastern white cedar. The cedar naming is just out of control, but Thuya occidentalis, and then that's Sequoia sempervirens. I don't know why I'm growing that, but just for fun. So yeah, that's pretty much what's going on in the garden here. Finally making, not entirely total, but almost complete use of the space. It's definitely a lot of room to improve there, but still pretty happy with what's going on here. Still some second-year-old stuff that I've got to dig up. These are, actually no, these are third year because I transplanted these. This is their second year of transplant growth here. So they need to get out of here. These are some serious apricots that will need to find a home very quickly. And I'll just end it here with, this is a persimmon called Rosayanka, and she decided to keep hold of one single fruit this year, so at least I'll get to try it. Pretty small tree, just second year, but if it's as good as they say it is, I'm going to graft a lot of that one onto the persimmon orchard. So that's what's going on in the garden here.